And this is amazing. So, in addition to what the text of the New Testament teaches about the end of the Old Covenant and the beginning of the New, there's a fascinating confirmation of this from outside the Bible. And the reason this is so astonishing is because it was written by essentially hostile witnesses, not Christians. This text I'm about to show you comes from the Babylonian Talmud, which is one of the central texts of Rabbinic Judaism. And it was written more than 400 years after Jesus by Jewish rabbis who didn't believe in Jesus and who rejected the Christian beliefs about God's new covenant. Now, in the Talmud, in a section or tractate that's called Yoma, which means the day in Aramaic, the text deals with the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. This was the high holy day of the Jewish calendar in which the sins of Israel were atoned for through animal sacrifices. And in this passage, we find an account that, without intending to, supports the New Testament teaching that the Old Covenant had become obsolete. Now, among other things, it says this, quote, "The sages taught, during the 40 years prior to the destruction of the Second Temple, the strip of crimson wool that was tied to the head of the goat that was sent to Azazel did not turn white." So, what's going on here? It's incredible. So first of all, the timeline. The Second Temple was destroyed when? In the year 70 CE. And what historical event happened 40 years prior to that? The crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. So this text is referring to a miraculous sign that used to occur on Yom Kippur. According to Jewish tradition, a strip of crimson wool was tied to the scapegoat during the sin sacrifices at the temple. And when the atonement ritual was accepted by God, the crimson strip would turn white, symbolizing the forgiveness of Israel's sins. This idea comes from Isaiah 1:18. "Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow." Now, this passage in the Talmud records that during the last 40 years before the destruction of the Second Temple, in other words, beginning at the death and resurrection of Jesus, that miracle stopped happening. The strip of wool no longer turned white, which was understood by the rabbis as a sign that God was no longer accepting the atonement. Remarkable. This Jewish text unintentionally confirms that God had accepted Christ's once and for all sacrifice on the cross, and the annual atonement sacrifices at the temple were no longer being accepted. They were no longer effective. They were the shadows, but Jesus is the reality. And Hebrews 10:18 says that because of the perfect sacrifice of Christ, there is no longer any offering for sin.